Time for a deep dive into the one issue that matters most in a capitalist democracy: money. This is Maggie and the Millionaires Talking Money, a joint production of The Maggie Dawn Show and The Patriotic Millionaires. Now, let's start talking money.
What's up, y'all? Welcome or welcome back. If you are rejoining us, my name is Maggie Dawn, host of The Maggie Dawn Show, and it is time for Maggie and the Millionaires Talking Money. Today, we've got an incredibly exciting guest. His name is David Sirota. And for those of you who may not be familiar with him, David is a man of many talents. With an incredibly impressive background, he's been a celebrated journalist for decades. He's had a long career working in politics. But most recently, he's been a senior advisor and speechwriter for Bernie Sanders' 2020 campaign. Since then, he's been nominated for an Academy Award for co-writing Don't Look Up, Netflix's second largest movie ever. And he is now the founder and editor-in-chief of The Lever, an investigative news outlet dedicated to exposing corruption in America. One of my favorite pastimes as well. So excited to have you here, David, to talk about, again, the word of the day on my show is bombshell. Your bombshell new report about this obscure tax loophole that I guarantee all of you've never heard of, that is going to be available to Elon Musk if Donald Trump appoints him, as like the efficiencies are in his cabinet in some newfangled sort of role, or like Treasury Secretary, God knows what. So David, welcome. Thank you for making time. Tell us about this piece that just came out in The Lever. What kind of tax break would Musk be looking at?
Well, thanks for having me. So here's how it works. In 1989, the George H.W. Bush administration slipped a provision into the tax code that basically says that if somebody comes into government, a wealthy person comes into government, and the ethics rules, the laws say you have to divest your current holdings in order to eliminate conflicts of interest in your new government job, you get to defer all taxes on the sale of those assets essentially indefinitely, if not permanently. So now run that process through the Elon Musk appointment. And to be clear, the Elon Musk appointment is not some theoretical idea. I mean, Donald Trump has promised to appoint Elon Musk, at one point alluding to maybe a cabinet secretary, but certainly a job overseeing the effort to make the government more efficient, which is, of course, a direct conflict of interest with Elon Musk's businesses, considering that SpaceX and Tesla have massive government contracts. Right. So you can. So the idea that there would be a conflict there, that's just a fact, right?
Yeah,
a guy
that's a given.
Whose job is to audit the government and figure out what more government services to privatize. If that person also is a government contractor that could get more contracts off the privatization, okay, that's a conflict. So if you run this scenario out, Elon Musk gets appointed, the ethics laws say, hey, you can't have this job unless you divest your holdings in things that create conflicts. Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, could be given this tax deferral that's available only to government officials, which would end up being the largest tax break in the history of the United States of America, the largest tax break for one single person. So we're not just talking about Donald Trump gets elected and then he cuts taxes for all billionaires. We're talking about a special tax break for one person, Elon Musk. There's been a lot of questions. Why is Elon Musk bankrolling the super PAC to help Donald Trump? What's that all about? It's it's staring us all right in the face.
Yeah, it is literally quid pro quo at the highest and most clear. When you define corruption, if you asked a kid taking civics class in high school to define corruption, this is basically what they would explain to you. Buying political favors, unbelievable. What are we looking at here? How much could he actually save?
I mean, it depends on what he would say he bought the original stock for, right? That's what capital gains is.
Yes.
It's the difference between what you bought it for and what you sell it at. But presumably he bought Tesla stock, owns SpaceX stock at a relatively low price. Now those companies now have huge government contracts, so they're worth a lot of money. The gain would be huge, and he wouldn't have to pay on the gain. Now, the other scenario that could happen, I could certainly foresee happening, is that Elon Musk doesn't want to have to sell his companies, sell his assets, while also having a job that helps him enrich his companies, having a job that there is a conflict of interest.
Yeah, why sell it if you're just about to make it more valuable through trading on your conflict of interest?
Sure.
Makes perfect sense, David.
So the way you get around that is you somehow get the Office of Government Ethics, which is the law enforcement agency that enforces government ethics laws. You get the Office of Government Ethics to look somewhere else, look away, issue you a waiver. Now, you might say, well, why would that happen? How could that happen? Well, guess what? The head of the Office of Government Ethics is a 5-year term. It's designed to be a 5-year term to sort of not be on the same track as the presidential administrations. The head of the Office of Government Ethics, it's vacant right now. There is a nominee in the Senate right now that's been waiting for approval. The nomination has been blocked by the Senate Republicans. One Senate Republican stood up on the floor of the Senate to say, we need to wait until after the election. The implication being, if Donald Trump wins, we effectively want Donald Trump to be able to choose his own policeman. That if he chooses his own policeman, now you can imagine that new Donald Trump crony appointing someone who says, you know what, I'll issue Elon Musk a waiver. We won't enforce the ethics laws when it comes to Elon Musk or anyone else the president doesn't want us to enforce it on. And thus, these people get to be in positions of government power with clear conflicts of interest, and the cops on the beat essentially in on the deal.
To summarize, Donald Trump has promised Elon Musk a cabinet position, which would trigger a tax break that would be the largest tax break, I'm going to go with like maybe ever in history, but certainly in the United States, for a single billionaire that already reaped billions in tax breaks from Donald Trump's 2017 tax cut for billionaires and corporations. And maybe he won't even have to sell it because the Republicans in the Senate have blocked the ethics watchdog that would oversee and make the decision about whether or not he actually has to divest when he engages in this horrific conflict of interest because he has billions in government contracts. And he's now on the cabinet looking into government efficiency and supposedly regulations of his very own business with those billions of contracts. Yeah, they're keeping that ethics watchdog position open until after the election so Donald Trump can win, put a lackey in the job, and then, of course, wave the magic wand to let Elon Musk engage in these.
I mean, it's their old playbook, right? I mean,
Okay.
We've seen them run that play with holding Merrick Garland, Supreme Court, right? That's their play. And the thing is with this, just explaining it sounds like something insane. It sounds like you're like, it's like so ridiculous that it can't be true, right? That's too ridiculous. Everything I've just said is literally true. You can find our story at The Lever, and you don't have to trust our story at The Lever. Every fact that we put out that's mentioned in this story, you can link back to government websites. You can link back to the documents. You can see it. This is 100% true. And one last thing I should add. This tax loophole has been used periodically in the past. Hank Paulson, the Treasury Secretary for George W. Bush, came from Goldman Sachs. He used this tax break to reportedly not have to pay taxes on, it was reportedly roughly about $400-500 million when he came over to the Treasury Secretaryship from being CEO of Goldman Sachs. So people have used this. This is not some crazy idea, some myth. This is real.
It's absolutely stunning. Now, it gets worse because he could avoid ever paying any tax, right?
Right.
Explain to us how this works, David.
Right. So it's technically a deferral. Now, when you defer taxes, you get to keep the money. You don't have to pay taxes. Obviously, you're going to be earning interest on the money. So that's, any tax planner says the more you can defer something into the future, the better. But if you put it in, essentially keep it in a mutual fund, in treasury bills, in your trust, earning that interest, et cetera, and you die, you never have to pay. Not only do you never have to pay tax on it, the
Nobody does.
taxes on it never have to be paid.
And that's not David's opinion. That's not my opinion. That's from an expert from Holland and Knight, a guy by the name of Bob Rizzi is a tax attorney at Holland and Knight based in Washington, D.C. It is truly shocking. Why do we even have a tax cut like this or a tax loophole like this? I need to call it a loophole because that's what it is. Do we need this in today's government?
I think that's a fair question. And the summary on that is George H.W. Bush's administration said it was harder to get people to come into government if you said to them, we're going to force you to divest and force you to pay a capital gains tax. Now, I can see the argument for that for somebody who is upper middle class, even sort of affluent, but not a billionaire. And the Democrats had legislation to say, listen, this thing can exist. You can't get more than a $1 million tax break on this, right?
So the Democrats tried to limit it to some reasonable amount. Okay.
Absolutely. They said, listen, the principle holds fine. There should be some way that if we force you to divest, you don't have to immediately get hit with a tax bill, and we'll make that tax benefit up to $1 million. Shocker, in the first Trump administration, that bill was blocked.
Oh, I'm shocked. No, I'm not shocked at all, David. Folks, that's my very special guest for today's episode of Maggie and the Millionaires Talking Money. His name's David Sirota. He is the co-author of the Academy Award nominated Don't Look Up, Netflix's second largest ever grossing movie. We're talking about government corruption. He is the editor-in-chief and founder of The Lever. He just broke an incredible story about the billions dollar tax loophole that will benefit one man, Elon Musk, if Donald Trump becomes president. But I want to try to get in one more question. It seems like these ethics, the things that should just be, of course you have to do this, right? Like just very commonsensical are sort of optional now. What's going on? I mean, we hear about these conflicts all the time. We hear about Congress people trading on insider information basically to enrich themselves. What's the problem here, David?
I'm glad you asked, and we should talk about it after the break. There has been a 50-year secret plot to legalize corruption in America, to legalize bribery in America that we have just completed an 11-part audio series on that I'd love to tell you all about how what you've just described became legal.
My special guest today, his name is David Sirota. He is a journalist. He's a screenwriter. He's worked on the Bernie Sanders campaign. This guy's done it all. And now he's helping expose government corruption. He's founded and is the editor-in-chief of a new online publication called Lever. We're going to put the link to the absolutely groundbreaking bombshell piece he just did on the quid pro quo that's going on between Donald Trump and Elon Musk to help Elon Musk get billions and billions in tax breaks if Donald Trump is elected. That article is going to be linked in our show notes. You can find that at civicmedia.us/Maggie Dawn Show. But David, you're telling me that this is not just a one-off. We've had a 50-year movement to basically make corruption in government legal. Tell us more.
So our audio series is called Master Plan. People can find it at masterplanpodcast.com. Our series tells the story of how, from the Watergate era to today, there was a plan executed by specific people with a specific agenda to deregulate the campaign finance system and legalize bribery. That sounds like a conspiracy theory, but they, in many ways, they wrote it all down. So it's a conspiracy, but it's not a conspiracy theory. This started with something called the Powell Memo. The Powell Memo was a memo written for the Chamber of Commerce by a guy named Lewis Powell, who at the time, this is in 1971, who at the time was the head of the American Bar Association and a tobacco industry lawyer at the sort of prominent peak of the establishment. He writes this memo to the Chamber of Commerce. This is a moment when the corporate types are scandalized and very enraged and aggravated by Ralph Nader. Because Ralph Nader and the larger grassroots movements that he participated in were winning all sorts of things from government. The government had become, in Lewis Powell's mind, too responsive. I mean, remember, this is the era of Medicare, Medicaid, the civil rights laws, the voting rights laws, the EPA, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act. I mean, the government,
the good old days.
I mean, just like so if you're Lewis Powell, if you're his corporate cronies, you're looking out at the world and you're like, the government is too responsive to the democracy, and we have to, corporate types,
the
oligarchs, the elite have to fight back. That's what his memo is all about. And his memo, there's a lot of things in his memo, but two of the things that it focuses on are the judiciary and the campaign finance system. And so subsequently from the memo in 1971, by the way, Lewis Powell, soon after that memo, gets installed on the Supreme Court, where he will come back to haunt our dreams. I'll tell you about that in a minute. As the Powell memo goes out, starts circulating, and it ends up creating a lot of these groups, conservative groups, that we've now gotten used to: the Heritage Foundation, the Pacific Legal Foundation, et cetera, et cetera. The whole right-wing infrastructure is sort of inspired and built from this memo. And very soon after the memo happens, Watergate happens, and there is the post-Watergate campaign finance reforms, which are then immediately limited by the Supreme Court in that Buckley v. Vallejo ruling, engineered in part by the Chamber of Commerce and the likes, to create the legal doctrine that money is not corruption. Money in politics is constitutionally protected speech, which is the basic building block of everything that subsequently comes. What comes right after Buckley v. Vallejo is Lewis Powell himself is now on the court. He works. By the way, we have all these never before reported documents about this. Lewis Powell works behind the scenes at the Supreme Court to take that ruling and effectively apply it to corporations, saying corporations have an unlimited, constitutionally protected First Amendment right to spend whatever they want to spend in election. That's called the Bellotti ruling. The Bellotti ruling becomes the most cited ruling in the Citizens United ruling. Now, that's a very truncated way of telling the story, and a lot of the story focuses on how the Federalist Society grows up out of the Powell memo to focus on the courts and ultimately switch the courts over to the Roberts courts and what that means. But just to be clear, all of the corruption we're living in, it may seem like a natural inevitability, but it is not. It is an artificial reality created by specific people with a specific agenda. And you might wonder, well, why would they want to legalize corruption? Why would they want to deregulate the campaign finance system? Because I think they understood that their agenda, their self-enriching agenda, is not a popular agenda that can get enacted in a one-person, one-vote democracy, that they needed to use the one thing they have a disproportionate amount of. They don't have a disproportionate amount of the votes. They have a disproportionate amount of the money. So if they can use the money to obtain a disproportionate amount of the power, they rig the one-person, one-vote system that's supposed to be there into essentially what you would call, I think fairly, an oligarchy.
Yes. When you layer this on with the history of the Electoral College and the fact that the Electoral College today bears no resemblance to what it was when it was created, we didn't have winner-take-all states. Wow, we have really worked ourselves into a weakened state of democracy here in this country.
Well, as I say this, people are worried about democracy in the election and Donald Trump, and I totally understand that worry. But I've sort of glibly say this, and darkly funny, I guess. If you're worried about the democracy crisis, let me tell you about the 50-year plot to have every election bought, every piece of legislation bought, every court ruling bought. That's the deeper democracy crisis thrumming underneath everything.
He is the symptom, but is not himself the cancer. And even if we eradicate Trump, there will be the next version, which will be slicker and less offensive and much, much more dangerous. David Sirota, folks, my great thanks to you for your time today, sir. We're coming up on it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, last thoughts, David. I'm going to give them to you. Speak to Wisconsin voters.
Yeah, listen, I would say you're in the hot seat. Look, I grew up in Pennsylvania. I grew up being in the hot seat too. Wisconsin voters are really in the hot seat. I would say, keep in mind that there is an acute democracy crisis. I think Donald Trump is a real threat to democracy, but after the election, no matter who wins, remember that corruption is not something we have to tolerate.
Money is not speech, and corporations are not people. Thank you, David Sirota.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Maggie and the Millionaires Talking Money, a joint production of Civic Media and the Patriotic Millionaires. For more information, go to patrioticmillionaires.org and be sure to tell your friends. The Patriotic Millionaires buy advertising across a number of Civic Media stations.